Yo, what's up everyone? It's Shots by Jack here. Today it's my first ever tutorial. You guys have been asking for it a lot and I've been putting it off for quite a while, to be honest. You know, today's going to be the first time breaking down a photo. We've got Tim's EVO 10 out that we shot out in Raglan. This was such a cool shoot. Tim's such a nice guy and his car was built absolutely immaculately. But yeah, we'll jump straight into it. For this photo, I did an HDR stack. For those of you who don't know what an HDR stack is, it's essentially 3 different images. One's captured to maintain the highlights, one's for the midtones, and one's for the shadows. Just means that you've got a full range rather than having blown out highlights or not enough data in the shadows to recover. So for this image here, I actually did film this video already, but the footage was corrupted. So this is what the image will look like when it's finished. Done the Photoshop and stuff like that. So I'm just going to be going back over it, editing it again, and kind of breaking down how I went about doing it. So to start off with, the basic tab, going along kind of bringing out the stuff that I need to start off, get a neutral photo to work with, bringing up the shadows, dropping down the highlights slightly. Dropping the highlights I find brings back a little bit of color to the sky and stuff like that as well, not so blown out. Add a little bit of contrast, grab some whites, add up some whites there, and drop the blacks back down. So that's looking about neutral where it is at the moment. Then we move on to our clarity and dehaze. Now, this is quite controversial for a lot of people. A lot of people love to bump up the clarity and then it can look too sharp. Some people like to have negative clarity. If they've got a pro mist, it just kind of gives it a bit more smooth of an effect. In this case, probably going to be adding a little bit of clarity, maybe about +7. We've got the dehaze. In this case, the dehaze doesn't work too well. It brings a lot of the blues. For this photo, I wanted a wee bit more of the pinks and the yellows that are coming directly from the clouds. So I'm going to drop the dehaze a little bit, just adds a wee bit more smoothness to the overall image. Going to bump up the vibrancy and a little bit of saturation, just to get a bit more colors going as well. Now jumping into the tone curve. Tone curve is something that people really don't seem to have a grasp on when they first start. It's quite scary. It doesn't really make much sense unless you've been doing photography for a while. Essentially, you've got 3 different points. So in this case here, you've got your highlights, you've got your midtones, and your shadows. Some people like to set these points before they edit them. It means that they can see exactly what each point's going to be adjusting. In this case here, we want to actually bring out a bit more of the highlights in the cloud. So we're going to bump it up a little bit. We're going to drop the midtones just slightly, brings a bit more contrast back, and then shadows, drop a little bit. Now for myself, and I know a lot of other people do it too, it's sometimes just a matter of sliding the slider and seeing what the effect has. Just back and forth, see what adjustment it's going to make, and then you can make a decision based off that. I tend to only use the blue curve. I don't really like messing with the green and the reds. That's kind of how I get my style through the yellows there. We're going to bring a little bit of yellows into the highlights, a little bit into the midtones, not too much, we're just very small adjustments. The tone curve can really have some big effects on your photos, so you have to be very careful with how you go about editing it. You can see it's just bringing in a bit more of a yellow tone to the greens and to the shadows there. Now jumping into the HSL tab, everybody does it differently. I like to have my 3 all visible, so that way I can kind of jump between all the different sliders. So for this case here, the clouds were a bit more pink. If you go back to the original photo, you can see that they are quite orange and pink. So we're just gonna bring that back a little bit and move this yellow slider down a wee bit. The aquas, I'm gonna move the aquas a wee bit more to the blue side. Bring a bit more blue in there. I don't really want to mess with that blue too much. We've got some purples here, so I just want to move those towards the blue side just so they don't stand out. They can kind of blend in all together. Got our oranges. I'm going to boost the saturation just a little bit. There's no reds, so I don't tend to touch those. A little bit more saturation in the yellows. Dropping some of the blues out of that car as well. Not too much in Lightroom, I find, because I can do a lot of it in Photoshop. I'll go in there with the saturation tool and do that later. A lot of the adjustments and stuff that I'm making are essentially to be changed later on. So just bringing up some of the luminance on the blues, because it's going to bring up a lot of the lightness in the actual car itself, which gives us a lot more freedom later down the line when we want to make adjustments from that. I didn't mess with the greens too much. I do want to bring up luminance on the greens just a wee bit to get that foreground just popping a little bit. And we'll jump into color grading. Now, color grading is another massive step for photos. It really does show through your style. As you edit more, you'll develop more of a style, and it'll slowly grow more. So for myself, I love to put a lot more yellows and stuff into my photo. Just how I prefer it. It's just something I've picked up over time. You guys might have your own style. You might want to add more blues or different colors. It's totally up to you at the end of the day. So here I'm just going to add a little bit of yellowy oranges to the midtones. Gonna pump up the luminance on that a little bit. Got our shadows here. You can see that I'm actually just messing with it just to see how much of a saturation effect I want and what color I want it to be. In this case, I'm actually going to do a little bit of blue because it matches the sky. And then I'll just remove the blue from the car later on, because at the end of the day, this car isn't a blue car, it's silver. So we don't want to have all those blues showing through in the car. Sweet, so moving on to the highlights. You can see where the highlights is affecting a lot, especially when you actually move it all the way to the top of the saturation. You can really see where it's affecting. In this case, I'll probably add a bit of yellows to it. I'm gonna drop it down to maybe less than 10 saturation. Any more than that, it starts to be a bit too much. For the sharpening, this is a big important step for my photos at least. I know a lot of people have different ways of going about it, but I'm not a big fan of grain unless I'm intentionally doing it, so I'll try and remove it as much as I can. Usually when you pump up the sharpening, you start to get a lot more grain. So what I tend to find, I'll bump it up to about 60 sharpening, and then I will counter it by doing some noise reduction. So in this case, looking about 40 is probably about perfect, because naturally there's still going to be grain in a photo, it's just how it works. But being able to remove most of it is really good. Jumping down to your lens corrections, making sure your lens corrections are turned on and stuff like that is also a pretty important step. Gets rid of this vignette. As you can see, I've got quite a heavy vignette around the edges. That's going to remove that for us. Sweet. Now jumping down to the last step. This isn't something that I use in every photo. In this case, it's quite good because there is a lot of these colors present. The blue, you've got your calibration. So this changes how your camera actually perceives the colors. So if I was to adjust the blue saturation, you're actually going to see it's going to improve the yellows as well. It's not just going to touch any of the blues. We're going to be moving the reds just a little bit because we want a little bit from the sky up here too. Now the last step, which is the most important step, this is shaping the image. This is using filters to actually show the viewer where the light source is coming from. So for myself, I like to add a lot of shadow to the bottom. I find that it just helps the eye transition from the foreground to the car a lot easier, and then they just pay a lot more attention to the car because we're not trying to show off the foreground. That's not our goal. The car is the goal. Going to be dropping down the shadows and the highlights here and dropping that down. Sweet, quite happy with that. Might actually change how big this graduated filter is and move it up. Play with this a lot. Just see how you want. It's based on personal preference, really. This here, I know that the light source is not coming from the right, so I'm going to dull it down just a little bit on this right side, just so that you've got a clear idea that the light source is coming from the left. Now, moving on to the left side, this is where the light's actually coming from. So you can use two options for this. You can use either the linear gradient tool, or you can use the radial gradient. I find radial gradients quite good when you're actually able to see where the light source is coming from, i.e. the sun is actually in the picture, or it's like right on the edge, because then you can get like a specific glow. In this case, where the sun's pretty much set, it's better to do one whole graduated filter across it. Just gives a lot more of an even lighting effect. So for this one, I'm going to bump up the shadows quite a bit because realistically there wouldn't be many shadows on that side. Bumping up the whites, bringing up the blacks a little bit as well, the highlights, and then I'm going to do a little bit of exposure. Now I'm going to add a little bit of a yellow color temp to it just because the sun is a little bit more yellow, and that gives us that ideal effect. Bring that down a little bit, just make it a little bit stronger. Perfect, that's looking about good. Might bring down a graduated filter from the top as well, just so it stands out just that little bit more. There we are. We're just going to drop the highlights a little bit more on the overall image. I'm going to pump up the shadows just a wee bit more. And that'll give us a little bit more to work with. From here, I'm going to jump into Photoshop. Usually my photos, I like to take them through 2 steps. Obviously it is a bit more work, but I find that the results are well worth it. I mean, even if it's only 5 to 10 minutes of Photoshop, it's still worth it just to add that little bit extra to the photo. So here I'll go to Photo, Edit In, and then you move it to Edit in Photoshop 2022. Now, if you don't have Photoshop, I definitely recommend getting it. You can get the photo package with Adobe, which is $20 a month NZD, which gives you Photoshop and Lightroom, and that's all you need. If you're just starting off in photography, don't worry about anything else. Photoshop and Lightroom will get you sussed. So jumping straight into the image, the first thing I like to do is just get rid of all the distractions. So much easier than getting through the whole process and then having to remove things. So jumping in straight away, biggest things I notice are the little specks of rocks and stuff like that, which are on the ground. To most people, most people don't really care. I mean, I like to just make it as appealing as possible. I mean, the less your eyes are distracted by any kind of objects, the easier it is for your eyes to view the image, and it's just it looks nicer, it looks cleaner. And it just brings the whole image together as a whole. This process here is simple as just grab a spot healing tool, just go over each of the little specks there. It might take you 2 minutes, it might take you 5, it just depends on how the ground is really. In this case, we don't really have a whole lot to work with, so it's not too bad. It just takes me like a minute or so to just go around and get rid of these things. Now obviously each image is different, sometimes there is bigger things to remove, but in the future I'm going to be doing some tutorials on how to actually remove objects from your photos. There's a lot of different methods all over YouTube and stuff like that, but I've found some ones that I've kind of worked with over the years. I've done photo restorations and all sorts of things, so the actual object removal side is something that I've done for quite a while. So yeah, if you guys want to see that, let me know, drop it in the comments, and yeah, I'll get it going. So moving in here, we've got the rego. You know, obviously not everyone removes this. I like to, so I may as well. In this case here, I can see that this little bit of like different color area is actually from the wing. If I was to just go over with a clone stamp tool right over this patch area, you wouldn't know the difference. So sometimes it's just as easy as that. Just moving over a little bit. Just like that, it's pretty much gone. Sometimes you can actually select around this little black piece here, so that you're not affecting it, and you're only working within that selection. But yeah, as you can see there, nobody knows the difference. So what we've got left to work with dust wise and clean up wise is a little bit on the car. Most of it is just a simple spot cleaning tool. Really underrated. I mean, there is obviously going to be jobs that it can't do, where you'll have to use the clone and the patch tool. But make your life easier. Don't try and use all the other tools just because you need to. Just use the right tool for the job. It'll make your life 10 times easier, and the edits will come way faster as well. I'm just getting rid of all the scratches and stuff on the carbon. Nobody's perfect. Help the car owners out. If they've got scratches, just remove it for them. Nobody wants to see that stuff. It takes you a couple of minutes to remove it in Photoshop, and the owners will appreciate it a lot more. At the end of the day, you're trying to show off their car in the best light possible, so anything you can do to make it just that little bit nicer for them, they'll really appreciate. They might not know that it took you an extra 10 minutes, but you'll know. You'll know. A little bit left here. Other than that, we're looking pretty good. Alright, so just jumping in, we've got the last bit of rego here. This part here, this is where I was talking about before with the selections. So sometimes what you can do, I can actually select right here, because I know I don't want to touch any of this area, and sometimes a clone stamp tool, it's going to have a wee bit of overspray, and it's going to actually like blend into the other photos. So here I'll just grab my clone stamp tool, I'll line it up with where the actual line of the window is going. Just stamp a couple of times. Might have to go from this side to make it blend a bit better, but do that. And then you'll see most people get to this point, they'll go, oh crap, now it's screwed. No, you just literally, you can use either the patch tool. I think the patch tool is sometimes the easiest option. And then just like so, and boom, it's done. Sometimes it just takes a couple of tools to make the job work. All right, so biggest thing for me right now that I can see is the color of the car. Obviously the car is not blue. So now this is where I like to adjust that and change it. So I'll jump into the hue and saturation layer. Usually when I start off, I'll just use the master tool and just completely get rid of all the saturation. It essentially works as a mask. You can see what you're actually painting and where you've missed. Alternatively, you can just use / and that will give you a mask. But sometimes I just like to have it this way. So I'm just going to bring the hardness up a little bit on the brush to 50%, just so that we're not going and affecting areas that we don't want to affect. Yeah, just good once over. This will add a lot more to your image than doing it in Lightroom. In Lightroom, the brushes, they don't actually adjust the saturation like in Photoshop. It's not a full saturation change. This in Photoshop is actually getting rid of all of the color. It's not just partially adjusting it. So I find that's the easiest way, rather than just doing it in Photoshop and it looking crappy. Rather than just doing it in Lightroom and it looking crappy. Just gonna do this straight over everything. In this case, I might actually use the mask. You can see these are areas that you're missing, but you don't think you're missing them. It doesn't look like you're missing them, but you are. And that's the difference that you'll notice. You know, it's the little things. There's a little bit of paint like that's not been painted or whatever. You know, sometimes that can really annoy you when you've posted a photo and then you later check it out and go, oh shit, there was that one last little bit that I missed. So this is probably the most tedious part, and to be honest, there's probably better ways of doing it. I could probably magically select it, and I know I'll probably get a few comments about that, but it is what it is. This is just, I find, my way of going about doing it that I've been doing for a long time. Alright, so this is looking pretty good. I'm going to turn the mask off, and you're going to see that that looks way too desaturated and it doesn't match the photo at all. So we're going to bring the saturation back to 0, and we're actually going to jump into the blues. So this way we can only affect the blues, and we're still going to get quite a bit of the yellow that's actually coming off the sky, because that color is going to be on the car. So blues didn't affect too much. We'll jump to the cyans. Bring down a bit in the cyans, and that is starting to look quite good. So you can see the difference there. That makes quite a large difference. Alright, now this is one of probably the most important parts that I'm a big fan of. I use dodge and burn. This really shapes where the light is coming from according to the car. With all cars, they're all designed with body lines so that you've got like the different body lines here. You can see where the highlights are reflecting on the car, where the midtones are kind of coming through. Right here, we want to add a bit more light coming in on the actual bonnet, because that's where the light is being reflected. So we're going to bring a bit more in here. You can see that's starting to add a lot more to the car. I'm going to come down and we're going to add a bit of more midtones to the wheels. I'm going to jump in with a bit of highlights too. Same with here. And now you can actually go over with the burn tool, the shadows, and burn in where all the shadows go. So you've got the body line of the car that you want to emphasize a little bit more. Obviously the shadows coming from the right, maybe a little bit in here, just down below here as well. And that is looking pretty good. So I'm happy with how that's looking now. We're going to jump in here with a paintbrush tool. This is something that I like to do a lot with my photos. You'll actually notice it quite a lot. Grab a color. We're gonna actually choose a color from the image so it looks the most natural. Gonna go with about a 5% opacity, and that there then gonna give us a nice wee glow through the whole image. So I'll bring it in from the left, just from where that left sun is coming in, right there. So you can see that. Now sometimes it can look a little bit overpowering, so I'll jump in with the soft light tool, the soft light adjustment, and that will it'll tone it down a little bit, but you still get that nice glow coming through the photo. Now the last little bit, I'm going to add a little bit of dodging to the ground itself, and that's just going to emphasize that light's coming from that side. And then I'm going to add a little bit of just dodging, just burning the ground and stuff as well. Now the last step, this is the last part. I'm going to do another tutorial for this as well, but this is a really, really helpful tool that I use. It's called TK Lum Mask. This tool is my favorite tool by far. It brings so much color into the image. So essentially you've got 5 different levels here. So whatever is showing as white is what you're actually selecting. So in this case, I'm going to select about 3 because that gets most of the highlights. Now this is the levels adjustment. You'll notice when I drag it to the right, a little bit more colors appearing. And bring that quite a bit down. I'm going to jump up to about a 4 and just affect kind of this area because I'm not quite happy with how this is looking. That's going to bring a lot back there. And then lastly, I'll do a wee bit of the shadows as well, just to affect that part there. So yeah, this is how the final image came out. Let me know what you guys think, or if you've got any questions for the next time. Make sure you subscribe, drop a like below, any comments, let me know. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback. Obviously, not everything I do is perfect, but this is just how I do it. So yeah, thanks for watching. Cheers guys.